Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Hard As Fuk podcast. This is a really special month, and I'm going to try something new and hopefully something you enjoy. And that's readings from great battles of World War One, World War Two, Afghanistan, any battle Canadians fought in. Describe the scene to you, describe some of the moments to you, learn myself because I want to give you a great product and represent H.A.F, Hard As Fuk company really well because it's a company about communication, learning, education, and empathy. Absolutely. Sometimes it's difficult. We deal with a lot of emotions, so it's hard for veterans a lot of times to communicate with one another. But I think once egos get out of the way and we learn how to become active listeners, we can be really great helpers in the community to each other outside. So start catching the people that get missed through and fall through the cracks. So for Lifelink, H.A.F, we're going to open with In Flanders Fields by Lieutenant Colonel John Mccrae. In Flanders Fields the poppy blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up quarrel with the foe. To you, from falling hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If we break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep through poppies grow in Flanders Fields. So I really love that last line because at the time it's obviously keep up the good fight for us, gentlemen, for king and country. We'll push through and defeat the Germans. I'm about to read about Ypres, which was a really unique battle. It was the first time the Canadians had experienced any battles on the World War One front against the Kaiser, and the Kaiser pushed through all the way to Ypres, which was the last stronghold in Belgium and needed to be held as a symbolic victory, because if the Kaiser took it over, it would have been a huge victory for the German Empire against the Allies and the United Kingdom, because that's why the Canadians were there in the first place, was to defend and go to war against the Kaiser who pushed through Belgium. Chemical warfare, chlorine gas was used. Really intense. The troops described the battlefields as death, and I get into it in a bit here in the readings. But men would claw at their faces, claw at their necks, gasping for breath, hearing their horses in trenches dying, and the men in the high ground where the gas was would rather take bullets than fall into the low ground and choke to death by chlorine gas. And the Canadians were on the right-hand flank as the French were on the left flank, and the French got the first brunt of the chemical warfare. And a particular German soldier said at one point, on this beautiful day, I should be in a picnic and enjoying the picnic, but instead I'm doing this horrible deed. And he was opening the canisters and releasing the gas. And then the French Algerians from northern Africa shot so heavily the Germans never heard the shots so fast. Yet this is in the Great War, so there was tons of epic battles, but the Germans never heard such fire. And then all of a sudden the fire had dwindled, and occasional shots were here and there, but that's because death went on the battlefield, and they were all dead. And when the Germans moved forward, there was a big bulge in the battle lines, and the Germans moved forward, and all they saw was death. Now think about this. This battle was days and days long, hours straight battling, very few rest, reserves going in, entire battalions being lost, and regiments being lost, and divisions being lost, and it's endless death. And the soldiers, and the Canadian soldiers in particular, fought in the Boer War and had the great intestinal fortitude to stand against chlorine gas in the face of retreating French troops as the Germans advanced through, and who have only been advancing, and then they face tough resistance, continuous rallying, counterattacks after counterattacks, and failed counterattacks by the Germans. It was very, very bloody. The gas in total killed 1 million people. 1 million people died just from the gas. And there's no, and that's where I get to the point. Imagine you as a soldier, you're shooting, but then there's nothing happening, and all your friends around you are dying, and you don't even have anybody to blame that upon except for the gas, and watch everybody die. Horrific. So this is why we remember. This is the point of Remembrance Day. Let's talk about these stories so we don't make these flaws and send troops to horrible fates. Okay, Ypres, the salient. Let us begin. The men of the 1st Canadian Division, farmers, lumberjacks, lawyers, factory workers, business owners, teachers, and doctors, were among the first Canadians to volunteer for the service in the war. More than 31,000 men traveled to England as part of a Canadian expeditionary force in October 1914. And I'd like to say the first killed at the Battle of Ypres was a member of the PPCLI, and the last Canadian regiment in combat at the Battle of Ypres was again PPCLI, first in, last out. 1914, after a training period in England, arrived in France in February the next year. By the time, 31,000 men traveled to England as a part of a Canadian expeditionary force in October 1914, and after a training period in England, arrived in France in February the next year. By this time, the fighting on the Western Front had stabilized into a war of attrition between the great armies of Germany on one side and France, Britain, and the Empire on the other, dug into a vast system of opposing trenches running from North Sea to Switzerland. In April of 1915, after a short taste of trench life in a relatively quiet sector of the front, the 1st Canadian Division ordered into Ypres salient, a bulge in the front lines on the Flanders plain east of the ancient Belgian city of Ypres. The Allies wanted to protect Ypres partly because it offered rail and road links to ports on the coast, for the Allies were determined to keep out of German hands. So huge ports, and you can move easily to create an invasion starting from the north of Belgium northeast, and you can sweep down. So very, very valuable for the Allied forces. Defending Belgium, people also a powerful justification for Britain's role in the war, and abandoning Ypres, the last major Belgian center unoccupied by German forces, would have signaled an important German victory. The salient was a dangerous place for Allied defenders. It was surrounded on three sides by enemy soldiers and artillery. The trench works the Canadians moved into April were also woefully inadequate, shallow, poorly constructed, and littered with human excrement, pools of water, and unburied corpses from soldiers killed in previous fighting. So this battle's been going on for a long time, and these trench systems, the Canadians have a really great way, and we have 3 stages and even 4 stages of creating trenches. And if it's under immense fire, and so we just heard too, I said surrounded by three sides. So that means they can get their artillery or enfilade fire across an entire trench line, brewing dudes up, and you have no choice to put your head in the earth and just pray. So these brave Canadians went into these shitty trenches, fixed them up under immense contact, and then here we go into the first gas attack. Chemical weapons have been outlawed by international treaties prior to the First World War. In the spring of 1915, however, Germany decided to test a new weapon, chlorine gas, on the Ypres salient. On the 22nd of April, the Germans released more than 160 tons of the gas from thousands of canisters arranged along the German lines. The Canadians and the French Algerian troops manning the trenches on their left watched as the mysterious yellow-green cloud appeared from over the no man's land between the opposing armies, and then drifted with the wind southward over the Allied lines. The heaviest part of the glass cloud hit the Algerians, the chlorine burning their throats and causing their lungs to fill with foam and mucus, effectively drowning the men in their own fluids. The Canadians watched in shock and horror as the suffocating Algerians broke from their lines, many fleeing towards them in panic, leaving 6-kilometer hole in the front line on the Canadian left flank. As the German forces moved from behind the drifting gas cloud, towards the now empty Algerian trenches, Canadian and British battalions, included soldiers themselves suffering from the gas, moved to plug the hole. During hours of desperate fighting that day, which helped from isolated groups of French and Algerians, they managed to stop the enemy from encirculating the 1st Canadian Division inside the salient and from marching over the city of Ypres. And really neat sub-note, at one point, counterattacks were very successful for the Germans. This is a highlight. The Germans pushed quite far, and at one point they were in the woods, and the Canadians of 500 Patricias were sent to this town at night, never seen the terrain, only were able to accomplish a map recce, and they defeated insurmountable odds. It was supposed to be a delaying operation, but the Canadians defeated the Germans, so there was a lot of grit by these young, inexperienced soldiers as well. Well, inexperienced in the Great War. Now we're on to the second gas attack, and remember, the gas attacks killed a million people during this First World War. Canadian and British, so second gas attack. Canadian and British forces spent the next several days launching counterattacks and fighting a series of chaotic engagements, trying to blunt the German assault and hold the lines outside Ypres. On the 24th of April, the second gas attack hit Canadians head on. None of the troops carried gas masks at this point in the war. Some Canadians fled. Many sought refuge in lying face down in the crevices of the trenches, where the green, hazy gas cloud, heavier than air, found and killed them. But many others survived by holding urine-soaked cloths and handkerchiefs over their mouths and noses, after being instructed to do so by medical officers who had identified the gas as chlorine. And I want an outstanding job by Canadian officers, as always. They led with the troops. They were on the front lines with the troops. They just led by example in good fashion. And to be a Canadian officer is to be the best in the world, I think, absolutely. And NCO. The gas came up and went over the trenches, and it stayed, not as high as a person, but all the way across, said Lester Stevens, a member of the English battalion from Winnipeg, who witnessed the second gas attack. Two fellows, one on my right and one on my left, dropped, and eventually they got them to the hospital. They both died. I was a bit of an athlete in those days, a good swimmer, and I could hold my breath. As soon as I saw the gas coming, I tried a handkerchief over my mouth. That saved my life. On April 24th, attack opened a series of gas in the Canadian lines and forced a retreat for several battalions. But overall, the battered 1st Division held the ground outside Ypres, buying time until the French and British reinforcements could be brought in. After 4 days of intense fighting, the Canadians were mostly relieved on April 25th. Forging reputation. The Second Battle of Ypres continued for another month, fought largely by British units, and the battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, which re-established control of the salient. For holding the line on the gas attacks for the first critical 4 days of the battle, the Canadians were praised for their courage and tenacity, a reputation that would grow as the war continued. The price, however, was high. Overall, British forces lost 59,000 men, dead, wounded, or captured. In the month-long battle, more than 6,500 of those casualties were Canadian, including 2,000 Canadian dead. Said Private Albert of Ontario, in a letter home to his mother, weeks after the battle, "I do not know how I come to be alive today. It is more than I can explain." Among those deeply affected by the horror of the fighting was John Mccrae, a Canadian Medical Corps officer who wrote the famous poem in Flanders Fields. On May 1915, just north of Ypres, in the midst of a battle. All right, so that's it. That's the first reading of November, the Battle of Ypres, which was a huge reputation builder for Canadian soldiers. Great pride for Canada. Great pride for me because that's my regimental history. This month is a really special month. I hope you connect with other veterans. I hope you connect with servicemen and women across. Tell your stories. Be open with your stories, because then we can affect change, affect better voting, and some empathy, because the Great Wars were so grand that humans don't need to fight again, and I think we only have today to make today better. So one family, one community, let's make this world a little bit better. Thank you so much.